Hey there, everybody. Um, it is another lovely day in wherever I am. Um, got off early from work today on good because of good behavior. So we are going to be reading chapter 2 of Stardust, uh, in which Tristan Thorn grows to manhood and makes a rash promise. Years passed. The next fairy market was held on schedule on the other side of the wall. Young Tristan Thorn, 8 years old, did not attend, finding himself packed off to stay with extremely distant relations in a village a day's ride away. His little sister Louisa, 6 months his junior, was, however, allowed to go to the market, and this was a source of great ranklement to the boy, as was the fact that Louisa brought back from the market a glass globe filled with speckles of light that glittered and flashed in the twilight, which cast a warm and gentle radiance into the darkness of their bedroom in the farmhouse, while all Tristan brought back from his relatives was a nasty case of measles. Shortly afterwards, the farm cat had 3 kittens, 2 black and white ones like herself, and a tiny kitten with a dusty blue sheen to her coat, and eyes that changed color depending on her mood from green and gold to salmon, scarlet, and vermilion. This kitten was given to Tristan to make up for missing the market. She grew slowly, the blue cat, and she was the sweetest cat in the world until, one evening, she began to prowl the house impatiently, to meow, and to flash her eyes, which were purple red of foxgloves. And when Tristram's father came back from a day in the fields, the cat yowled, bolted through the door, and was off into the dusk. The guards on the wall were for people, not for cats, and Tristan, who was 12 by this time, never saw the blue cat again. He was inconsolable for a while. His father came into his bedroom one night and sat at the end of his bed, saying gruffly, "She'll be happier over the wall, with her own kind. Don't you fret now, lad." His mother said nothing to him on the matter, as she said little to him on any subject. Sometimes Tristan would look up to see his mother staring at him intently, as if she were trying to tease some secret from his face. Louisa, his sister, would needle him about this as they walked to the village school in the morning, as she would goad him into so many other things, the shape of his ears, for example. The right ear was flat against his head and almost pointed, the left one was not. And about the foolish things he said. Once he told her that the tiny clouds, fluffy and white, that clustered across the horizon at sunset as they walked home from school were sheep. It was no matter that he later claimed that he had meant simply that they reminded him of sheep, or that there was something fluffy and sheep-like about them. Louisa laughed and teased and goaded like a goblin, and what was worse, she told the other children and incited them to baa gently whenever Christian walked past. Louisa was a born inciter and danced circles around her brother. The village school was a fine school, and under the tutelage of Mrs. Cherry, the schoolmistress, Tristan Thorn learned all about fractions and longitude and latitude. He could ask in French for the pen of the gardener's aunt, indeed, for the pen of his own aunt. He learned of the kings and queens of England from William the Conqueror, 1066, to Victoria, 1837. He learned his reading and had a fair copperplate hand. Travelers to the village were rare, but occasionally a peddler would come through the village selling a penny dreadful, accounts of grisly murders, fateful encounters, dire doings, and remarkable escapes. Most peddlers sold song sheets, 2 for a penny, and families would buy them and gather around their pianos to sing songs such as Cherry Ripe and In My Father's Garden. So the days went by, and the weeks went by, and the years went also. At age 14, by a process of osmosis of dirty jokes, whispered secrets, and filthy ballads, Tristram learned about the sex. I'm sorry. That the book phrased it as Tristan learned of sex, and my brain immediately replaced it with Tristan learned about the sex. When he was 15, he hurt his arm falling from the apple tree outside Mr. Thomas Forrester's house, more specifically from the apple tree outside of Miss Victoria Forrester's bedroom window. To Tristan's regret, he had caught no more than a pink and tantalizing glimpse of Victoria, who was younger than him, and without any doubt the most beautiful girl for 100 miles around. By the time Victoria was 17, and Tristan also, she was, in all probability, he was certain, the most beautiful girl in the British Isles. Tristan would have insisted on the most beautiful girl in the entire British Empire, if not the world, and boxed you, or been prepared to, had you argued with him. You would have been hard-pressed to find anyone in Wall who would have argued with him, though. She turned many heads, and, in all probability, broke many hearts. A description. She had her mother's gray eyes, a heart-shaped face, her father's curling chestnut hair. Her lips were red and perfectly shaped. Her cheeks blushed prettily when she spoke. She was pale and utterly delightful. When she was 16, she had fought vigorously with her mother, for Victoria had taken it into her head that she would work in the seventh Magpie as a pot maid. "I have spoken to Mr. Bromios about this," she told her mother, "and he has no objection." "What Mr. Bromios thinks or does not think," replied her mother, the former Bridget Comfrey, "is neither here nor there. That is a most improper occupation for a young lady." The village of Wall watched the Battle of Wills with fascination, wondering what outcome would be, for no one crossed Bridget Forrester. She had a tongue that could, the villagers said, blister the paint from a barn door and tear the bark from an oak. There was no one in the village who would have wanted to get on the wrong side of Bridget Forrester, and they did say that the Wall would be more likely to walk than for Bridget Forrester to change her mind. Victoria Forrester, however, was used to having her own way, and if all else failed, or even if it did not, she would appeal to her father, and he would accede to her demands. But here even Victoria was surprised, for her father agreed with her mother, saying that working in the bar of the Seventh Magpie was something that a well-brought-up young lady would not do. And Thomas Forrester set his chin, and there the matter ended. I just want to double-check my memory, because names are not my strong suit. Not that important. I'm more than fairly certain that Victoria is the daughter of the... I'm pretty sure that Victoria's mother was the one working the pub and married out of it. So, anyway, every boy in the village was in love with Victoria Forrester, and many a sedate gentleman, quietly married with grey in his beard, would stare at her as she walked down the street, becoming for a few moments a boy once more, in the spring of his years, with a spring in his step. "They say that Mr. Monday himself is counted amongst your admirers," said Louisa Thorne to Victoria Forrester one afternoon in May in the apple orchard. 5 girls sat beside and upon the branches of the oldest apple tree in the orchard, its huge trunk making a fine seat and support, and whenever the May breeze blew, the pink blossoms tumbled down like snow, coming to rest in the hair and on their skirts. The afternoon sunlight dappled green and silver and gold through the leaves in the apple orchard. "Mr. Monday," said Victoria Forrester, with disdain, "is 45 years of age as he is a day." She made a face to indicate just how old 45 is, when you happen to be 17. Which, truth be told, is kind of gross. "Anyway," said Cecilia Hemstock, Louisa's cousin, "he has already been married. I would not wish to marry someone who had already been married. It would be," she opined, "like having someone else break in one's own pony." "Personally, I would imagine that would be a sole advantage of marrying a widower," said Amelia Robinson. "That someone else would have removed the rough edges, broken him in, if you will. Also, I would imagine that by this age his lusts would long since have been sated and abated, which would free one from a number of indignities." A flurry of hastily suppressed giggles amid the apple blossom. "Still," said Lucy Pippin hesitantly, It would be nice to live in the big house and to have a coach and four, and to be able to travel to London for the season, and to Bath to take in the waters, or Brighton for the sea bathing, even if Mr. Monday is 5 and 40. The other girls shrieked and flung handfuls of apple blossoms at her, and none shrieked more loudly or flung more blossom than Victoria Forrester. I'm gonna have to look up which book. Oh, Letty had her sisters. One of her sisters goes, "I'm going to get rich and powerful without having to marry anybody." And yeah, honestly, that is one of the best options that is not considered nearly often enough by young ladies in books. Tristan Thorne, at the age of 17 and only 6 months older than Victoria, was half the way between a boy and a man, and was equally uncomfortable in either role. He seemed to be composed chiefly of elbows and Adam's apples. His hair was the brown of sodden straw, and it stuck out at awkward 17-year-old angles, wet and comb it howsoever much he tried. He was painfully shy, which, as is often the manner of painfully shy, what he overcompensated for by being too loud at the wrong times. Most days, Tristan was content, or as content as a 17-year-old youth with his world ahead of him as ever can be. And when he daydreamed in the fields or at the tall desk at the back of Monday and Brown's, the village shop, he fancied himself riding the train all the way to London or Liverpool, taking a steamship across the grey Atlantic to America, and making his fortune there among the savages in the new lands. Yes, moving to New Jersey. But there were times when the wind blew from beyond the wall, bringing with it the smell of mint and thyme and red currants, and at those times there were strange colors seen in the flames in the fireplaces of the village. When that wind blew, the simplest of devices, from lucifer matches to lantern slides, would no longer function. And at those times, Tristan Thorne's daydreams were strange, guilty fantasies, muddled and odd, of journeys through forests, to rescue princesses from palaces, dreams of knights and trolls and mermaids. And when these moods came upon him, he would slip out of the house and lie upon the grass and stare up at the stars. Few of us now have seen the stars as folks saw them then. Our cities and towns cast too much light into the night. But from the village of Wall, the stars were laid out like worlds or like ideas, uncountable as the trees in a forest or the leaves on a tree. Tristan would stare into the darkness of the sky until he thought of nothing at all. Then he would go back to his bed and sleep like a dead man. He was a gangling creature of potential, a barrel of dynamite, waiting for someone to light the fuse. But no one did. So on weekends and in the evenings he helped his father on the farm, and during the day he worked for Mr. Brown at Monday and Brown's as a clerk. Monday and Brown's was the village shop. While they kept a number of necessaries in stock, much of their business was conducted by means of lists. Villagers would give Mr. Brown a list of what they needed, from potted meats to sheep dip. To dip your sheeps in. From fish knives for fish, to chimney tiles. A clerk at Monday and Brown's would compile a master list of everything requested, and then Mr. Monday would take the master list and a dray pulled by two huge Shire horses, which I imagine is just a really big cart, and he would set off for the nearest county town and return in a handful of days with the dray loaded high with goods of all description. It was a cold, blustery day in late October, of the kind that always seems about to rain but never actually does, and it was late in the afternoon. Victoria Forrester walked into Monday and Brown's with a list, written in her mother's precise handwriting, and she rang the small bell for the counter for service. She looked slightly disappointed to see Tristan Thorne appear from the back room. "Ah, good day, Miss Forrester." She smiled a tight smile and handed Tristan her list. It read as follows: 1/2 pound of sago, 10 cans of sardines, 1 bottle of mushroom ketchup. Because, interestingly, ketchup is a matter of preparation. It is not an ingredient. So you can have fish ketchup. Random history fact. Anyway, 1 pound of rice, 1 tin of golden syrup, whatever that is, 2 pounds of currants, a bottle of cochineal, 1 pound of barley sugar, 1 shilling box of Roundtree's elect cocoa, 3 dozen tins of Oakey's knife polish. They either have a lot of knives or that is a small tin. 6 dozen of Brunswick Black, 1 packet of Swinburne's Isinglass, 1 bottle of furniture cream for dipping your furniture in, 1 basting ladle, a 9-penny gravy strainer, and 1 set of kitchen steps. Tristan read it to himself, looking for something about which he could begin to talk, a conversational gambit of some kind, any kind. He heard his voice saying, "Oh, you'll be having rice pudding then, I imagine, Miss Forrester." As soon as he said it, he knew it had been the wrong thing to say. Victoria pursed her perfect lips, blinked her gray eyes, and said, "Yes, Tristan, we shall be having a rice pudding." And then she smiled at him and said, "Mother says that rice pudding in sufficient quantity will help to stave off chills and colds and other autumnal ailments." "My mother," Tristan confessed, "has always sworn by tapioca pudding." He put the list on a spike. "We can deliver most of the provisions tomorrow morning, and the rest of it will come back with Mr. Monday early next week." There was a gust of wind then, so strong that it rattled the windows of the village, and whirled and spun the weathercocks until they could not tell north from west nor south from east. The fire that was burning in the gate of Monday and Brown's belched and twisted in a flurry of greens and scarlets, topped with a fizz of silver twinkles, of the kind one can make for oneself at a parlor fire with a handful of tossed iron filings. Chemists will know better colors. The wind blew from fairyland to the east, and Tristan Thorne suddenly found himself in a certain amount of courage he had not suspected that he had possessed. "You know, Miss Forrester, I get off in a few minutes," he said. "Perhaps I could walk you a little way home. It's not much out of my way." And he waited, his heart in his mouth, while Victoria Forrester's gray eyes stared at him, amused. After what seemed like 100 years, she said, "Certainly." Tristan hurried into the parlor and informed Mr. Brown that he would be off now, and Mr. Brown grunted in a not entirely ill-natured way that told Tristan that when he was younger, he'd not only had to stay late each night and shut up the shop, but that he had also had to sleep on the floor beneath the counter, with only his coat for a pillow. Which is, of course, what people who own businesses say, because they expect everybody who works for the business to care as much as the owner does, because they are in fact boobs. Tristan agreed that he was indeed a lucky young man, and wished Mr. Brown a good night. Then he took his coat from the coat stand and his new bowler hat from the hat stand, and stepped out onto the cobblestones where Victoria Forrester waited for him. The autumn twilight turned into deep and early night as they walked. Tristan could smell the distant winter on the air, a mixture of night mist and crisp darkness, and the tang of fallen leaves. They took a winding lane up towards the Forrester farm, and the crescent moon hung white in the sky, and the stars burned in the darkness above them. "Victoria," said Tristan after a while. "Yes, Tristan," said Victoria, who had been preoccupied for much of the walk. "Would you think it forward in me to kiss you?" asked Tristan. "Yes," said Victoria, bluntly and coldly. "Very forward. Points for the lady." "Ah," said Tristan. They walked up Dighty's Hill, not speaking. At the top of the hill they turned, and saw beneath them the village of Wall, all gleaming candles and lamps, and glimmering through windows, warm yellow lights that beckoned and invited, and above them the lights of the myriad stars, which glittered and twinkled and blazed, chilly and distant, and more numerous than the mind could encompass. Tristan reached down his hand and took Victoria's small hand in his, and she did not pull away. "Did you see that?" asked Victoria, who was gazing out over the landscape. "I saw nothing. I was looking at you." Victoria smiled in the moonlight. "You are the most lovely woman in all the world," said Tristan from the bottom of his heart. Get along with you, said Victoria, but she said it gently. What did you see? Asked Tristan. A falling star, said Victoria. I believe they are not at all uncommon this time of year. Vicky, will you kiss me? Said Tristan. No, she said. You kissed me when we were younger. You kissed me beneath the pledge oak on your 15th birthday, and you kissed me last May Day behind your father's cowshed. I was another person then, she said, and I shall not kiss you, Tristan Thorn. If you will not kiss me, asked Tristan, will you marry me? Because that, of course, is a perfectly reasonable thing for a teenager to ask. There was silence on the hill, only the rustle of the October wind, then a tinkling sound. It was the sound of the most beautiful girl in the whole of the British Isles, laughing with delight and amusement. Marry you, she repeated incredulously. And why ever should I marry you, Tristan Thorn? What could you give me? Give you, he said. Why, I would go to India for you, Victoria Forrester, and bring you the tusks of elephants, and pearls as big as your thumb, and rubies the size of wren's eggs. I would go to Africa and bring you diamonds the size of cricket balls. I would find the source of the Nile and name it after you. I would go to America, all the way to San Francisco, to the gold fields, and I would not come back until I had your weight in gold. Then I would carry it back here and lay it at your feet. I would travel to the distant Northlands, did you but say the word, and slay mighty polar bears and bring you back hides. I think you are doing quite well, said Victoria Forrester, until you got to the part about the polar bears. Be that as it may, little shop boy and little farm boy, I shall not kiss you, neither shall I marry you. Tristan's eyes blazed in the moonlight. I would travel to Far Cathay for you, and bring you a huge junk I would capture from the king of the pirates, laden with jade and silk and opium. I would go to Australia at the bottom of the world, said Tristan, and bring you, bring you. He ransacked the penny dreadfuls in his head, trying to remember if any of their heroes had visited Australia. A kangaroo, he said, and opals, he added. He was fairly sure about the opals. Victoria Forrester squeezed his hand. And whatever would I do with a kangaroo? Now, we should be getting along, or my father and mother will be wondering what has kept me, and they will leap to some entirely unjustified conclusions, for I have not kissed you, Tristan Thorn. Kiss me, he pleaded. There is nothing I would not do for your kiss, no mountain I would not scale, no river I would not ford, no desert I would not cross. He gestured widely, indicating the village of Wall below them, the night sky above them, and the constellation of Orion low on the eastern horizon. A star flashed and glittered and fell. For a kiss and the pledge of your hand, said Tristan grandiloquently, I would bring you that fallen star. He shivered. His coat was thin, and it was obvious he would not get his kiss, which he found puzzling, because he was a teenage boy. And manly heroes of the penny dreadfuls and shilling novels never had these problems getting kissed. Go on, then, said Victoria. And if you do, I will. What? Said Tristan. If you bring me that star, said Victoria, the one that just fell and not another star, then I'll kiss you. Who knows what else I might do? There, now you need not go to Australia, nor to Africa, nor to Far Cathay. What? Said Tristan. And Victoria laughed at him, and took back her hand and began to walk down the hill toward her father's farm. Tristan ran to catch her up. Do you mean it? He asked. I mean it as much as you mean all those fancy words of rubies and gold and opium, she replied. What is opium? Something in cough mixture, said Tristan. Like eucalyptus. Man, the 1800s were rad. Does not sound particularly romantic, said Victoria Forrester. Anyway, should you not be running off to retrieve my fallen star? It fell to the east, over there. And she laughed again. Silly shop boy, it is all you can do to ensure that we have the ingredients for rice pudding. And have I brought you that fallen star? Asked Tristan lightly. What would you give me? A kiss? Your hand in marriage? Anything you desire, said Victoria, amused. You swear it? Asked Tristan. They were walking the last 100 yards now up to the forester's farmhouse. The windows burned with lamplight, yellow and orange. Of course, said Victoria, smiling. The track to the forester's farm was bare mud, trodden into mire by the feet of horses and cows and sheep and dogs. Tristan Thorn went down on his knees in the mud, heedless of his coat or his woolen trousers. Very well. The wind blew from the east then. I shall leave you here, my lady, said Tristan Thorn, for I have urgent business to the east. He stood up, unmindful of the mud and mire clinging to his knees and coat, and he bowed to her, and then he doffed his bowler hat. Victoria Forrester laughed at the skinny shop boy, laughed long and loud and delightfully, and her tinkling laughter followed him back down the hill and away. Tristan Thorn ran all the way home. Brambles snagged his clothes as he ran, and a branch knocked his hat off his head. He stumbled, breathless and torn, into the kitchen of the house on the westward meadows. Look at the state of you, said his mother. Indeed, I never did. Tristan merely smiled at her. Tristan, asked his father, who was 35 and still middling tall and still freckled, although there was more than a few silvering hairs in his nut-brown curls. Your mother spoke to you. Did you not hear her? I'm the same age as his dad. A little old now. I beg your pardon, father, mother, said Tristan, but I shall be leaving the village tonight. I may be gone for some time. Oh, foolishness and silliness, said Daisy Thorn. I never heard such nonsense. But Dunstan Thorn saw the look in his son's eyes. Let me talk to him, he said to his wife. She looked at him sharply. Then she nodded. Very well, she said, but who's going to sew up the boy's coat? That's what I would like to know. She bustled out of the kitchen. The kitchen fire fizzed in silver and glimmered green and violet. Well, where are you going? Asked Dunstan. East, said his son. East. His father nodded. There were 2 easts. East to the next county, through the forest, and east to the other side of the wall. Dunstan Thorn knew, without asking, to which his son was referring. And will you be coming back? Asked his father. Tristan grinned widely. Of course, he said. Well, said his father, that's all right then. He scratched his nose. Have you been giving any thought to how you're getting over the wall? Tristan shook his head. Well, I'm sure I can find a way, he said. If necessary, I'll fight my way past those guards. Father sniffed. You'll do no such thing. How would you like it if it was you on guard duty, or me? I'll not see anyone hurt. He scratched the sides of his nose once more. Go and pack a bag, kiss your mother goodbye, and I'll walk you down to the village. Tristan packed a bag, and his mother brought him 6 red, ripe apples and a cottage loaf and a round of white farmhouse cheese, which he placed inside his bag. Mrs. Thorn would not look at Tristan. He kissed her cheek and bade her farewell. Then he walked into the village with his father. Tristan had stood his first watch on the wall when he was 16 years old. He'd only been given one instruction, that it was the task of the guards to prevent anyone going through the gap in the wall from the village by any means possible. If it was not possible to prevent them, then the guards must raise the villagers for help. He wondered as they walked what his father had in mind. Perhaps the 2 of them together would overpower the guards. Perhaps his father would create some kind of distraction and allow him to slip through. Perhaps... By the time they walked through the village and arrived at the gap in the wall, Tristan had imagined every possibility except the one which occurred. They summoned MacGyver and some sort of large wooden badger. On wall duty that evening were Harold Crutchbeck and Mr. Bromios. Harold Crutchbeck was a husky young man, several years older than Tristan, the miller's son. Mr. Bromius's hair was black and curled, and his eyes were green, and his smile was white, and he smelled of grapes and of grape juice, of barley and of hops. Tristan Thorn walked up to Mr. Bromius and stood in front of him. He stamped his feet against the evening chill. "Evening, Mr. Bromius. Evening, Harold," said Dunstan. "Evening, Mr. Thorn," said Harold Crutchbeck. "Good evening, Dunstan," said Mr. Bromius. "I trust you are well." Dunstan allowed as that he was, and they spoke of the weather and agreed that it would be bad for the farmers, and that, for the quality of the holly berries and yew berries already apparent, it would be a cold and harsh winter. As he listened to them talking, Tristan was ready to burst with irritation and frustration, but he bit his tongue and said nothing. Finally his father said, "Mr. Bromius, Harold, I believe you both know my son Tristan." Tristan raised his bowler hat to them nervously, and then his father said something he did not understand. "I suppose you both know where he came from," said Dunstan Thorn. Mr. Bromius nodded, without speaking. Harold Crutchbeck said he heard the tales, although you never should mind the half of what you hear. "Well, it is true," said Dunstan, "and now it is time for him to go back." There's a star!" Tristan tried to explain, but his father hushed him into silence. Mr. Bromius rubbed his chin and ran a hand through his thatch of black curls. "Very well," he said. He turned and spoke to Harold in a low voice, saying things Tristan could not hear. His father pressed something cold into his hand. "Go, on with you, boy. Go and bring back your star, and may God and all his angels go with you." And Mr. Bromius and Harold Crutchbeck, the guards on the gate, stood aside and let him pass. Tristan walked through the gap, with the stone wall on each side of him, into the meadow on the other side of the wall. Turning, he looked back at the three men, framed in the gap, and wondered why they had allowed him through. Then, his bag swinging in one hand, the object his father had pushed into his hand in the other, Tristan Thorn set off up the gentle hill towards the woods. "Yes, dear?" "You are being very patient, and I appreciate that. I love you very much. You're a good girl." She is being the long-suffering, beloved pupper. Give me 1 second. I will be right back. I love you. You are a very cute girl. You are being very well behaved and putting up with all manner of noise and nonsense from upstairs and in here. Here you go, baby. Go ahead. I love you. It's difficult being a dad. As he walked, the chill of the night grew less, and once in the woods, at the top of the hill, Tristan was surprised to realize that the moon was shining brightly down on him through a gap in the trees. He was surprised because the moon had set an hour before, and doubly surprised because the moon that had set had been a slim, sharp silver crescent, and the moon that shone down on him now was a huge golden harvest moon, full and glowing and deeply colored. The cold thing in his hand chimed once, a crystalline tinkling like the bells of a tiny glass cathedral. He opened his hand and held it up to the moonlight. It was a snowdrop made all of glass. A warm wind stroked Tristan's face. It smelled like peppermint and blackcurrant leaves and red, ripe plums, and the enormity of what he had done descended on Tristan Thorn. He was walking into Fairy, in search of a fallen star, with no idea how he would find the star, nor how to keep himself safe as the whole world as he tried. He looked back and fancied that he could see the lights of the wall behind him, wavering and glimmering as if in a heat haze, but still inviting. And he knew that if he turned around and went back, no one would think any less of him for it. Not his father, nor his mother, nor even Victoria Forrester would likely as not merely smile at him the next time she saw him and call him shop boy. an ad that stars once fallen often proved difficult in the finding. He paused then. He thought of Victoria's lips, and her gray eyes, and the sound of her laughter. He straightened his shoulders, placed the crystal snowdrop in the top buttonhole of his coat, now undone. And, too ignorant to be scared, too young to be awed, Tristan Thorne passed beyond the field we know, and into Fairy. So, I do want to point out, first of all, for the young gentlemen, and perhaps some of the young ladies in the audience, it's not a good way to talk to people that you're interested in. Because what he was doing was a whole lot of talking and not a lot of it listening. So, yeah, don't just walk up to women who you're not already in a relationship with and ask them to kiss you. Again, I kind of feel like he's supposed to be, young and bold and more childish, but still, it's gross. Don't do it. The other thing, the one other thing that I really like that the movie did really, really, really well is that they clearly established that Tristan and Victoria had a relationship, but she's also kind of a horrible person. And so he goes off on the adventure to prove how much he loves her, and it kind of gradually becomes more and more apparent that she wouldn't do the same thing. But anyway, I don't want to spoil the movie because it's really, really, really good. But maybe wait until I'm done reading because it's a short book and I should be done pretty soon. Oh yeah, 233 pages. And we're doing like 30 pages at a stint. That shouldn't take too long, as long as I'm, actually recording. Man, so remember, if you want to be in a relationship with somebody, the first thing that you need to do is listen. And the second thing you need to do is listen. And the third thing that you need to do is respect them when they tell you what to do. Because, infatuation is being willing to do anything for somebody else. Love is being willing to do what they want and loving them in a way that they understand and communicating love is expressing love in a way that they understand and appreciate. That wasn't it. Anyway, enough of my soapbox. You have more important things to do than listening to me wax poetical about love and what it's like to be a teenage boy and full of, well, not angst. Weird interpretations of romance. Anyway. Yes, it is belly rub time. Not time for Dad to keep talking and talking and talking. So, get some rest and do your best. And if people can love without knowing, I can love you for exactly the same reason. So take good care of yourself, okay? And you will see me next time.